Very recently, I came across a game that reminded me of my past. A time where I was excited to get back home to switch on my PS2 and be transported to a brand new, exciting world. Be it Drakengard, Kingdom Hearts, or Final Fantasy, these are a few games that when I play today, I still feel that rush of excitement and nostalgia. For the past few years, I've been searching for an older game that can replicate that exact feeling, and I'm happy to say that I've found it. The game in question is Dark Cloud. Before I start work on my breakdown on the Kingdom Hearts series, thanks to hitting my goal on Patreon, and trust me, if I could kiss you all on the mouth, I would, I wanted to cover a couple more games so I have enough time to mentally prepare. Dark Cloud, a game created by Level 5 Studios, feels like, to me at least, a love letter to the PS2 era. Something to keep in mind is that I first bought this game in 2016, and I've only recently completed it, so let's just say there weren't any pre-existing nostalgia goggles blinding me from making this review one-sided. The game is filled to the brim with charm and has that rusty old imperfection that a lot of older games seem to have. Is the game good? Absolutely. Is the game perfect? Absolutely not. As is the case with every game I review on this channel. As I mentioned, that rusty old imperfection runs deep into the veins of this game, so I'll be tackling both the good and the bad parts of this title, starting with the introduction. The game starts with some Third Reich looking motherfucker and his rotund friend, watching a ceremony they orchestrated to awaken an ancient evil sealed within a magical urn. The dance itself lasts way too long, but my god is it ever amusing to watch. After the ceremony ends, the ancient evil is released from its prison, revealing the Dark Genie, an entity that completely destroyed the face of the planet hundreds of years ago. However, after 400 years, he's feeling a little peckish and does something that'll make a select few in the audience very aroused indeed.
I have an idea. Lugia will eat me, so I'm stuck in Lugia's stomach alone.
Not long after, we're introduced to our main character, Tone, and the village of No Room, which is in full festival mode. However, as we all know, if a location is having too much fun at the start of the game, someone's bound to come cause a mess eventually. Long story short, the village is bombed to shit by Fantasy Hitler and Friend. Tone rushes in to save an important lady friend, and it looks like the game is ending early. But not before he's whisked off to safety by an entity known as the King of the Fairies, who claims something bad has happened. Understatement of the fucking century, considering how half of Tone's world has been completely destroyed. The Fairy King gifts our protagonist with a stone called the Atlamilia, a stone which holds the power of rebuilding the world. His reasons for choosing Tone are essentially, you seem like a nice enough kid, fuck it, you'll do. And just like that, the intro ends, Tone going from a traumatized young man after seeing the destruction of his village to being pleasantly distracted by a flower/butterfly combo, you cute little bastard. So now we're into the game itself. What does Dark Cloud have to offer the player? Primarily two things: town building and dungeon crawling. Note how Tone's village is now an empty plot of land. This is because the King of the Fairies stored all of the village and its residents within oversized gacha balls named Atla, which are spread randomly throughout the village's dungeon. Tone, using the Atlamilia, can absorb these Atla and can then go on to place that house, tree, road, river, etc. around the empty plot of land, slowly filling it up into a working village, which is described to you in-game using these adorable little animations. That admittedly did help me remember how to do things solely because of how memorable they were. Either that or I have the brain of an actual child, and within this great boundless universe, anything is possible. Now, I'm not much of a completionist, but my god, there's something inherently satisfying about making your village perfect. As you're rebuilding, you'll note a lot of the houses have empty spaces. These are the parts that make up a specific building. The only way to complete it fully is to actively talk to the villager of that building and ask them what it is they want in order to finish their house. Once it's done, boom, you get an event. This is the case with every single NPC you find in the game, making it so the world feels very much lived in. That every village has its own culture and way of life. I really fucking love this feature. Oh, okay. What about this one?
Get your minge off that child!
Moving on, the dungeon crawling aspect is exactly what it says on the tin, really. Each dungeon contains 15 to 25 floors, and your job is to go deeper and deeper, collecting Atla in order to complete the village or town you visit. Since the locations you need to restore are spread around the map, you'll be getting a variety of different dungeons. However, they all suffer a problem the older Persona games had in that they're pretty much hallways with the occasional large room. Thankfully, the theme of each dungeon is such a drastic change that it at least makes us feel like we're exploring somewhere completely new. The dungeons are split up into a cave, forest, sunken ship, ancient ruins, the fucking moon, and a creepy old castle. Something else which is a total saving grace of these types of dungeon layouts is the fact that each floor within these dungeons are randomized. So if you were to teleport out of the dungeon floor because you, let's say, didn't bring enough food in with you and were low on health, upon returning to the dungeon floor you were on, it'll be reset, including treasure chests and enemies. This allows for fantastic replayability as you're technically greeted with a brand new floor every time you re-enter. Another mechanic inside dungeons is thirst. Essentially, you're on a very loose time limit within these dungeons due to needing to rehydrate yourself on long ventures. Don't panic though, it's not nearly as bad as it sounds, as you'll find gourds around your village which increase your overall thirst meter. Now before I move on to the inevitable issues that dungeons have and the gameplay that'll go on inside of them, I feel it's necessary to explain more of the story in order for these points to make sense. At this point, Tone has been rebuilding his village and going deeper into the first dungeon. Along the way, he keeps bumping into this cat which runs away whenever he gets close. Eventually, we bump into a mysterious white-haired man who we saw briefly in the introduction, who asks that he's given the Atlamilia, because despite Tone's noble goal of killing the Dark Genie, it'll simply return again in another time. However, after inhaling a ton of bad juju, he turns into a very naughty boy and forcibly tries to take the stone. During some of the dungeon floors, you'll be required to complete a very short rhythm game in order to progress, which seems pointless but does add something else to do as you descend, so it's a welcome inclusion. I kind of love how patronizing the game is when you complete this one though. Now, in a scene which would later baffle me, after seeing how Tone wouldn't move from his enemy's attack due to protecting the frightened cat behind him, the mysterious man decides to throw him a grow your own cat girl potion, which does exactly what it says on the fucking bottle. So yeah, out of nowhere we have our second playable character, Xiao the Cat Girl. Did you think there was going to be more explanation after this? Nope, this is literally all we get of our second main character. For the rest of the game, we'll only be seeing her in dungeons, and that's it. And this seems to be a trending theme for the other characters as well, those being Goro, the son of a legendary hunter, who gets a genuinely touching scene with his father before he's thrown with a cat. There's Ruby, a sultry genie who you accidentally release from her lamp.
Enchanté.
Her entire goal boils down to, is the Dark Genie stronger than me? I guess, no he isn't. Next up is Gaga, who gets the best development out of every central protagonist minus Tone. He's a warrior who is somehow not contained within an Atla and is left to be by himself, and his guilt over not keeping his village and fiancée safe from the Dark Genie. He also gets some of the more unintentionally funny cutscenes when you start to complete his village.
This is it. I'm finished. A scorpion sting. I will die.
Hey, you're right there, fam. What's you doing down there, lad?
A scorpion got me. I will die soon.
And last but not least, Osmond, a moon rabbit whose main job is to build a giant construct to help you beat the Dark Genie. He also has a machine gun, which pretty much makes him radical as heck by default, I mean God bless. And other than what I explained, there really isn't anything else to these characters. And for this game, I'd say it's fine that way. Sure, they could have intricate, deep pasts, but for what it's worth, the game functions perfectly well with the little backstory and general presence they have. Your main use for these characters is to progress further into a dungeon. Say you come up to a large pit. Tone can't jump it, however Xiao can. Can't move past this gate because you need someone to smash this button? Switch to Goro and have him solve it. So on, so forth, etc. Their playstyles also change the game up in an interesting way, and this is where I'll be moving on to the part I'm sure a lot of you are curious about. The gameplay. Now, when this game first came out, there was a large buzz about it being the PS1's answer to 3D Zelda. And well, let's say despite both Dark Cloud games being critically acclaimed, Level 5 didn't have the same impact as Nintendo. Oh no, what did you do? I feel this Zelda comparison boils down to how you fight monsters. You lock on, slash your sword a bit, and wait for them to fall down. Plain and simple, really. However, I find comparing the game in its entirety to Zelda a little wrong? If only the gameplay is similar, I don't think it's fair comparing it to another title. Enemies in Dark Cloud are used for grinding your weapons and finding items to progress further into the dungeon, whereas enemies in 3D Zelda titles are more than often built around getting in the way and to solve a puzzle. That in itself is a big difference from game to game. It's like saying Wild Arms is the next Final Fantasy. Just because they share similar gameplay elements doesn't make it the next best thing. For example, something which Dark Cloud does that's completely different from the Zelda formula is the upgrade system. Your weapon has a bar named Abs. When you defeat monsters, that Abs system will continue to grow until you can upgrade your weapon. You can place stones and gems within these slots which help power it up, and when you upgrade it, these stones become a permanent part of a weapon's final stats. The downside is, the weapons break if you overuse them, but so long as you have enough repair powders, this should never become a real problem. Come to think of it, didn't Breath of the Wild have breakable weapons? Is Zelda the next Dark Cloud? See how that's bullshit? I guess you could say the boss fight introductions are slightly similar to how Zelda does it, but I think this entire point is starting to outstay its welcome, so I'm going to move on to that exact topic. Boss fights. At the end of every dungeon, there's a boss fight. These boss fights can range from fairly simple to pretty challenging, and can legit test your general understanding of how the game works. The most perfect example for this is the third boss, Lugia. You understand very early on that standing in the open is a bad fucking idea. So you look around your environment and notice the pillars. Problem 1 solved. Lugia has a barrier that negates physical attacks, so how do you get past this? You switch to your new character, Ruby, destroy the barrier with magic, then proceed to pelt the shit out of her with fire gems because she's made out of ice for God's sake. Lugia was also the first boss where her story actually affected me on some emotional level. A queen who drowned herself due to her true love leaving her at the altar. Her general demeanour after hundreds of years reflects in her appearance and attacks. Frozen over and cold as ice. On the topic of some characters being useful during boss fights, this definitely is the case for regular enemies as well, but in the end I think you'll find the characters you're comfortable with and stick with them. For me it was Tone, Xiao and Ruby. Xiao because of her fast weapon speed and range, but you should probably get used to this. Ruby because she makes my PP leak, but also because she's a fucking powerhouse later into the game due to her heavy-hitting magical attacks. And thirdly, Tone because he's the only one who can touch Atlas in order to release whatever's inside. That is my cue to really start nitpicking at all of the problems I found within this title. I'm calling these nitpicks because I don't think it's fair of me to berate a game that's over 16 years old for issues that were relatively common for games to have back then. Let's start with the fact that only Tone can touch Atlas. I really dislike this function. Say you switch to Xiao to hop over a large gap, but there's an Atla on the other side. You have to press L2, scroll to Tone, pick up the Atla only to switch to Xiao to hop back over the gap. But are then forced to switch to Tone again because there's an Atla in the next room. Whenever you click on an Atla, there's a short cutscene that plays each time, so why not make it so a character can touch an Atla only to skip to that specific cutscene of Tone? This whole process can become tedious in the later dungeons when you have to slowly scroll past 3 other characters just to reach the main boy in question. Secondly is the thirst system. I think this is pointless. It never once proved a threat since you eventually stack up so much hit points that the slow tick down of health is barely noticeable when you run out of water. Thirdly is the fact that Gaga's animation where he blows away the dark energy blocking a door lasts way too long and I can literally have a nap in between these segments. Fourthly, the camera is slow as ever-loving hell and there's absolutely no way to change it in the options menu. You also can't choose to invert it, which is the usual setting I have cameras on in-game, so for most of my playthrough I was veering off in the wrong direction then cranking the camera back over like I'm steering a goddamn car. And last but not least, holy shit, the PS4 HD port is busted. Like, did you test this shit before you slapped it on the PS4 for £11.99, you jammy cunts? What are you doing? Anyways, with that out of the way, we can return to the main meat of the story, which occurs in the last 3/4 of the game. So basically, Tone needed to go to the moon, you know, as you do, in order to get help from the lunar bunnies that reside there to stop the Dark Genie once and for all. With the help of Osmond, they build a Goliath which has the power to stop the genie in its tracks and to burst through the protective layer of dark clouds that are protecting the castle it's currently residing in. After busting on through, they have a bit of a tussle before the Dark Genie is seemingly destroyed. However, it turns out that this Dark Genie wasn't the Dark Genie at all, it was a fucking rat. The rat crawled into the urn when all the ceremony was going on. This is the Dark Genie, or at least its possessed Flag Gilgister. This is Flag, by the way. You know, the guy in the intro who never reappeared again for 20+ hours. The Dark Genie, using Flag as a puppet, destroys the Goliath and completely breaks Flag's body, killing him in the process, discarding him into the void below. When you reach the inside of a castle, we meet with the mysterious white-haired man we met in the first dungeon. This man reveals himself to be Seda, the king that ruled over the lands that Tone lives in 400 years ago. By using time travel shenanigans, he brought himself to this time in order to stop the genie from being reawakened and wreaking the same havoc it did on his land all those years ago. It turns out, the reason he keeps getting possessed by an unseen force is because he was the catalyst for the Dark Genie's birth, and that unseen force is actually the genie itself. This is why that earlier point baffled me, because it turns out the Dark Genie gave Tone a grow your own catgirl potion for no discernible reason other than to fill your character roster. It's like, thank you for the kitty cat, Mr. Genie, but why though? Seda takes his own life within Tone's timeline in order to send Tone back to his time to stop the Dark Genie from ever being born. Now what's amazing about this final dungeon you're about to enter is because what you're building isn't a village, isn't a town, it's the goddamn truth. Within this dungeon, you'll find memories that you'll need to piece together. When a memory's complete, you get to read what are essentially picture book segments, explaining what exactly happened 400 years ago to cause the cataclysmic events around the globe. In essence, Seda was a newly crowned king. On the night of his crowning ceremony, he met the love of his life, Sophia. After that night, with thoughts of her on his mind, an accident in a storm would bring them back together as if drawn by fate. They fell in love and became an item. However, war with the Eastern lands was still raging, and Seda's army was taking heavy casualties. Enter a mysterious magician who offers him a devastating power to reduce the Eastern army to ash. He accepts it and obliterates the enemy forces. Upon returning home, he's elated to see his beloved. However, this turns out to be an imposter, an assassin ready to take his life. The real Sophia gets in the way of the blade and her life ends. Seda, overcome with rage and grief, accidentally births the Dark Genie due to this new power gifted to him by the magician, it being a manifestation of the pure feelings of rage and heartbreak over Sophia's death. The Dark Genie, beholden to no one, blindly destroys city after city, town after town, until the world is virtually ablaze. Seda, realizing the horror he unleashed upon the world, uses his newfound power to rip into space and time, bringing him into the future to stop the Dark Genie before he's released from captivity. This is essentially where our story begins. Tone, now in Seda's timeline, witnesses the moment where the Dark Genie was about to be born. He tries to stop the assassin before it's too late, but ultimately fails.
See that again.
I'm trying to take this seriously! Tone wasn't able to stop the Dark Genie's birth. However, he still has a chance to beat it. He and his friends are taken into a pocket void where the real form of the genie is revealed. You then begin to fight two bosses, the Dark Genie and the camera. This final boss is exactly what I meant when I said rusty imperfection. Despite conceptually being fucking amazing and looking like an absolute badass, the fight itself left me frustrated. During the first mechanic, he tries to hit you with his hands coming out of the floor. I initially had an element tied to my weapon and it did 0 damage, so naturally I changed to an element which would work, and it did. So I spent the next 10 minutes swapping back and forth, thinking whether or not I was missing something. Turns out, swapping to that element only increases the damage by a small amount. Selecting no element does a nice amount of damage regardless, so what's the point of assigning elements to the hands? Don't forget his fun wing attack, which you can't avoid no matter what, and if you don't have any stamina potions which reduce damage and increase your strength, will most likely deplete your HP resources incredibly fast. His final form is where the camera comes into play. Locking onto this giant form will slow you down, meaning you can't avoid this giant laser, so you have to run aimlessly till you hear the laser stop, then run in and attack his mouth. Overall, the boss isn't the worst thing I've ever fought, and I'd say I had fun during parts, but it definitely leaves much to be desired. When you eventually beat it, the Fairy King gives Tone a very helpful piece of advice. The Atlamilia can restore anything to its previous form, including life itself. However, the stone is destroyed in the process. Sophia returns back to the world of the living. The Dark Genie has been destroyed, and Seda is no longer bound to a soul-crushing fate. A story would later be written about a certain boy who went on a fantastical adventure to restore the world. This tale would pass into legend. However, we know in the end that this tale is very much true. Tone returns to his own timeline, Xiao now in her original cat form at his side, as they run off to No Rune Village, happily ever after. And well, that's Dark Cloud, a game that despite being held back in certain parts due to a very natural aging process is still an absolute joy. You know I dig this shit, but nothing's spotless, much like my beloved Final Fantasy IX, something which will get exactly the same treatment in the future, and that I can promise you. Dark Cloud is available to purchase right now on the PS4's PSN store, so if you own the console and want to try a game that gave me an experience I haven't had since I was a teenager, then by all means, buy it, and hopefully enjoy it. I wonder if the sequel, Dark Chronicle, fixes any of the issues I had with the first game. I guess we'll be finding out in the next video. Thank you all so much for watching. All of the names that are scrolling down at the moment are patrons who are helping me make the content you're watching now. If you want to become a patron, then the link is at the very top of the description. For $1 you can get your name in the credits, for $3 you can watch the raw live action footage, and for $5 you can listen to every new podcast a few days early. Much love for any support I get, and I'll see you all next time.